Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Cold Case Chronicles. I'm your host, Miguel Mares, and today we'll be talking about the Texarkana Phantom Killer. Before getting into the story, I would like to mention that I'll be making some comments in between segments of my thoughts or beliefs of what's going on in the story, and I will signal the start of my segment with this sound effect. So, yeah, let's get right into it. It all started in the night of February 22nd, 1946, in the Texas Arkansas border town, Texarkana. 25-year-old Jimmy Hollis and 19-year-old Mary Jean LeRae went on a date to the movies and began driving back to Mary Jean's home. On their way there, they stopped their car on a quiet, unpaved road about 100 yards away from some houses in a residential neighborhood. This is not really important to the story, but I just think it's funny that, we all know what's going on there. And yes, I'm going over the fact about the age gap because, this is 1946, different values, different morals, whatever, get over it. About 10 minutes later, a man walked up, as Mary Jean would later relate, quote, he wore a white mask over his head, with cutout places for his eyes and mouth. He pointed a flashlight and a pistol at us. He came up from the driver's side of the car and told Jimmy something like this: I don't want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say. End quote. Both Jimmy and Mary Jean got out of the car. The sailor made Jimmy take off his pants, then hit him twice over the head, cracking his skull and knocking him unconscious. The attacker then tried sexual assault and robbed Mary Jean. I don't know about you guys, but personally for me, I feel like him wearing a mask would have given me slight relief because it meant that there was a slight chance of me making it out alive because he was hiding his face, meaning that, I couldn't identify him later. But if he wasn't wearing a mask, then that was probably the last face I would see. Mary Jean pleaded with the attacker, telling him they didn't have any money. The attacker hit Mary Jean, knocking her to the ground. When she got up, the man told her to run. Mary Jean took off down the road, but she was wearing high heels at the time, till the assailant quickly overtook her and hit her again, knocking her to the ground, where he then began to abuse her. At this point, Jimmy struggled to his feet and managed to stop a passing car. It is believed that the assailant saw the car lights and fled from Mary Jean. Both Jimmy and Mary Jean received medical treatment. Jimmy spent over 12 days recovering in the hospital. In the mid-40s, Texarkana was relatively a violent place. Killings, robberies, and other crimes were very common. It might make sense then, while the attack on Jimmy and Mary Jean was brutal, the community didn't pay it much attention until another attack occurred a month later, this one with fatal consequences. On the morning of March 24th, authorities found the bodies of 29-year-old Richard L. Griffin and 17-year-old Polly Ann Moore, a 1941 Oldsmobile on what was then known as the Lover's Lane. Both had been shot in the back of the head. Richard was found between the two front seats on his knees with his head in his hands. His pants pockets were inside out, thought to be the result of someone trying to rob him. Polly Ann was discovered face down in the backseat of the car, although some evidence suggested she may have been murdered on a blanket outside of the car and placed there later. The couple had been seen around 10 p.m. the night before, eating dinner with Richard's sister. They had been shot with what was thought to have been a Colt .32 caliber pistol, and any footprints that would have been around the car had been washed away throughout the day. I don't know why, but for me, this trope or stereotype of serial killers cases happening in Lover's Lane scenario is just funny to me. Because I don't know, I imagine serial killers gathering like once every year, be like, okay, so are we still doing this Lover's Lane scenario, or are we changing it? And like, I feel like they have a vote like every year or something like that. I don't know, it's just funny to me. Though there weren't many clues for authorities to go off of, 3 days after the killings, at least 50 people had been asked about the murder, and over 100 false leads had been investigated. While this attack, ending in the murder of a young couple, caught the attention of more people than the first assault, the community still believed these events to be isolated incidents. This would change 3 weeks later, as their indifference will turn into a frenzy of fear. On April 14th, authorities found the bodies of 15-year-old Betty Jo Booker and 16-year-old Paul Martin. The previous night, the two teens had attended a band performance at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Club, where Betty Jo played alto saxophone. They were seen leaving the dance around 1:30 in the morning. Paul had been shot 4 times and was discovered in a rural area on North Park Road. Betty Jo had been raped and shot twice. Her body was found up in the woods about a mile away. Both had been shot with a .32 caliber Colt, the same weapon thought to be used in the previous attack. With this being the third attack in less than 2 months, now with 4 young people dead, the community was finally paying attention and they panicked. When their husbands and fathers were wait for work, women and children would move into the aptly named Hotel Grim in downtown Texarkana. Not everyone decided to run though. Others bought guns and crafted homemade security systems from kitchenware and wire around their homes. Typically bustling streets went quiet. The Texarkana Gazette named the attacker the Phantom Killer. I don't know why news outlets feel this need to give serial killers cool and mysterious names. In my opinion, I feel like it just gives more motivation for serial killers to go out and bring more attention to themselves in a certain manner. Panic across the town was at an all-time high. Even Tillman Johnson, one of the lead investigators, said, quote, "We were constantly getting calls, mostly at night, about prowlers. People would call about any noise they heard at all." End quote. Everyone was afraid they would be the next victim of the Phantom Killer. When I read this while I was doing research, I don't know why, I just was a funny image in my head. I just imagined all these families in this quiet, serious Texas town, just booby trapping their house, Carrie McAllister on. It was a funny image in my head. On May 3rd, 37-year-old farmer Virgil Starks listened to a radio when a .22 caliber round tore through his front porch window and hit him. His wife Katie left their bedroom to find Virgil bleeding in the living room. Katie went to call for help when the attacker shot her twice in the face. The bullets knocked some of her teeth out, but she survived, ducking to avoid more shots. She made her way back to the bedroom as the attacker tried to break in through the kitchen window. Katie escaped out the front door with a bullet stuck under her tongue and trailing blood behind her. Katie made it to the nearby farmhouse, where she was taken to a hospital and survived. Virgil, however, passed away. I don't know why, but I feel the need to bring more attention to the fact that Katie survived 2 gunshots to the face, and she was able to run away from the killer and call for help while she had a bullet stuck under her tongue. I don't know, just major props to her. An indication of the fear the Phantom Killer had instilled in the community, 20 to 30 police officers converged on the Starks farmhouse. Police tried to gather evidence and interview possible suspects and witnesses. According to Johnson, quote, "People would stand out near the front of their homes and yell at you to identify yourself before you got too close. You had to identify yourself or you would get shot." End quote. Authorities followed bloody footprints left by the killer that went from the house across the highway, where they eventually lost the trail. While this incident exacerbated the fear of the Phantom Killer, it is possible this killing was done by someone else. The other attacks had targeted people younger than the Starks and had taken place in cars, not homes. Additionally, Virgil was shot with a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol, a different weapon than the .32 caliber used in the previous murders of Betty Jo and Paul Martin. Still, this incident was included in the Phantom Killer investigations. As panic struck the area, authorities, as a last resort, took to dressing as the young couples in an effort to lure out the murderer. But it appeared the Phantom was done. 2 months later, with no more Phantom murders, the community fears began to decrease, and life started to get back to normal. No one was ever found guilty of these murders. Now, on to the theories. For this case, there's basically 2 different suspects. The first suspect, a college student named H.B. Duty Tennyson, that confessed to some of the killings in a note left behind after he committed suicide. According to one of the newspapers from the day of his death, a sheriff deputy reportedly said the note read, quote, "Why did I take my own life? Well, when you commit 2 double murders, you would too. Yes, I did kill Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin in the city park that night, and killed Mrs. Stark and tried to get Mrs. Stark." End quote. According to Duty's cousin, forensic psychiatrist Dr. John Tennyson, Duty had connections to all the victims. He was allegedly an usher at the theater where some of the victims of the attacks had seen movies before their deaths, and had been in the same high school band as Betty Jo. According to Dr. Tennyson, one of Duty's friends lived on the same roof as the sister of Katie Starks. The only problem with this theory is that the sources involving Dr. Tennyson are weak at best. The second suspect is 29-year-old Yuli Sweeney. Around the time of the attacks, Arkansas State Trooper Max Stackett observed that cars were reported stolen and later found abandoned whenever the Phantom Killer made an attack. Following this lead led police officers to stake out a downtown parking lot on June 28, 1946, where a stolen car was abandoned. This led to the arrest of 21-year-old Peggy Sweeney the new wife of one Yoli Sweeney. While in custody, Peggy gave many detailed statements explaining how her husband committed the murders of Betty Jo and Paul. Though descriptions of her own involvement varied from statement to statement, on July 23rd, Peggy gave a statement saying that on April 13th, the day before the bodies of Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin were found, she and Ewell parked at Spring Lake Park and drank some beers. According to her statement, Ewell left the car saying that he had to, quote, take a leak, end quote. Peggy said, quote, he was gone from the car about 1 hour when I heard something that sounded like 2 gunshots. It was just getting daylight when he came back to the car and started driving out of the park at a rapid rate of speed. When he came back to the car, I saw that his clothes were wet up to his knees and damp on up to his waist. End quote. She later gave another statement of the same night, claiming that she was there with Ewell when he was, quote, going to rob some people, end quote, and saw him kill Paul Martin. She also stated that Ewell tried to, quote, get some, end quote, with a young girl, and then shot her when she refused. While Peggy's story shifted, she crucially told police information that only someone who had been at the scene of the crime would have known. For instance, Peggy mentioned how Paul's daybook was thrown into some bushes, a fact that only Bowie County Sheriff W.H. Bill Presley knew at the time, as he had been the one who found the book. I feel like for this, there's either one or two scenarios that actually happened. One, she was actually there, or two, she was there with Ewell, just having like a normal date or whatever. But when she walked away and stumbled upon the bodies, and obviously she ran away. But later on, when she was arrested, she was afraid that they were going to find out that she was actually there, so she made up these statements, and that's why they're conflicting. Ewell was arrested while he was attempting to sell a stolen car. Ewell was taken to Little Rock for a truth serum shot, but he was given too much, which caused him to pass out. Investigator Tillman Johnson said, quote, I think that if we had just kept him here in Texarkana and kept questioning him, we would have gotten the truth out of him eventually, end quote. Peggy was in prison for her involvement in the car thefts, but was later released. Ewell was sentenced to life in state prison for the habitual car thefts, but was later released on parole in 1973. He later died in a nursing home in 1994. The Texarkana Phantom murder stands out, as he managed to stoke a frenzy of fear in a community that had been numb to violent crimes. As W.E. Atchison, a resident of the area who was 16 at the time of the attacks, said, quote, the big wonder for everyone back then was whether the killings were done by someone who lived among us, and I still wonder who did it, end quote. Across 4 attacks, 5 people were shot to death, and 3 others were severely injured. The murders by the hand of the Phantom Killer will forever remain a cold case chronicle. I feel like this case highlights the importance of having witnesses, either 1, 2, multiple witnesses on scene, because it helps you form a coherent timeline of the events and just allows you to come to conclusions even faster. And on to our last segment of this episode, being current events of this week. The event I chose is that Mexico's most famous volcano, the Popocatépetl, erupts multiple times, spewing ashes and canceling flights. This is, really, I feel like in my opinion, it's a really scary but really fascinating thing, because I always found nature fascinating of how it can act, but it's also dangerous for the people living around the volcano, and also it ruins the quality of air, ruins a lot of stuff. So yeah, hopefully everyone there is doing okay, and hopefully this event ends soon. Thank you for joining me for the second episode of Cold Case Chronicles. Hope you have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you later. Peace.